In 1933, a Hungarian explorer named Laszlo Almazy was deep in the Sahara Desert, in one of the most lifeless places on the surface of the earth, southwestern Egypt. A landscape of bare rock and endless sand, where it does not rain for years at a time, where nothing grows, where the temperature can kill a person in an afternoon. And on the wall of a cave, in the middle of all that emptiness, he found people swimming. Not a carving of a river, not a symbol. Human figures, painted onto the rock, arms out, legs kicking, bodies angled in the unmistakable posture of people swimming through water. Painted by someone who had watched people swim in a place where today there is no water for hundreds of kilometers in any direction. Almazy looked at those swimmers, surrounded by the most brutal desert on earth, and he came to a conclusion that sounded, at the time, completely insane. He proposed that the Sahara had once been green, that there had been
setting,
water
and the animals
here.
are restless.
It is a
Lakes
peaceful evening.
deep enough to swim in, that the driest place in the world had once been alive. You have to understand how absurd that sounded. This is a place where a person without water dies in a day, where the sand can reach temperatures that cook an egg, where you can travel for a week and see nothing alive at all. Suggesting that
hunter finds
people
his
had
mark.
once swum
Their
here
steps
was like
are in time
standing on the
with the
surface of the moon and insisting there had been a beach. And yet, Almazy had spent enough time in that desert, seen enough dry riverbeds and strange shapes in the rock to believe what the painting was telling him, that the emptiness was not eternal, that it was the aftermath of something, and that the something had been green. And here is the
The
thing.
wind picks up,
was
revealing the
right.
symbols more clearly.
The cave
Yes,
is
the
real.
stories of the
It is now called the Cave of Swimmers, and it is not alone. Across the Sahara, buried in the most remote, waterless, God-forsaken corners of the largest hot desert on Earth, there are hundreds of thousands of paintings and engravings.
hunter and the animals.
Hippos wallowing in water, herds of cattle, giraffes and elephants and crocodiles, men hunting, women dancing, children playing. Whole scenes of a green, wet, crowded, living world. They were painted by people who lived there. And every single lake, every river, every animal, every swimmer they painted is gone. This is the story of the Green Sahara. A time not so long ago when the largest desert on Earth was a savanna full of water and animals and people. And the story of how, in the space of a few generations, it turned into the wasteland we know today and swallowed their
Fire,
entire
sun,
world.
and drum. Feast,
Let's start with the
dance,
evidence
and
you
look,
can
son.
see with your own eyes, because it is overwhelming. The Sahara is sometimes called the world's largest art gallery, and that is not a figure of speech. At a single site, a plateau in southern Algeria called Tassili Niger, archaeologists have cataloged something like 15,000 separate paintings and engravings. Across the whole desert, the total runs into the hundreds of thousands. This is one of the greatest concentrations of prehistoric art anywhere on the planet, and it is sitting in a place where today almost nothing can survive. And what the art shows is not desert. The oldest images, going back perhaps 12,000 years, show the wild animals of a wet, green land. Hippos, which need deep, permanent water and lots of it. Elephants, giraffes, rhinos, crocodiles, ostriches, big herds of antelope chased by bands of human hunters with bows. Then, in the later paintings, the animals change. The wild game gives way to cattle, herds and herds of cattle, painted in loving detail, with their markings
found
and
something
their
remarkable.
horns carefully recorded.
Let's analyze it with
You
the
see
instrument.
people among them now, not just hunting, but living. Herders moving their animals, figures dancing, rows of people in what look like ceremonies, scenes of ordinary daily life in a landscape green enough to feed great herds of livestock. And the artistry is not crude. Some of these paintings are genuinely beautiful, carefully observed, full of movement and life, made by people who clearly looked hard at the world around them and wanted to record it exactly. The cattle have individual markings. The hunters have posture and tension. The dancers have rhythm. Whoever made these was not scratching idle marks on a wall. They were documenting a world they knew intimately, with skill built up over generations. When the German explorer Heinrich Barth became the first European to document this art back in the mid-1800s, he understood immediately that something was wrong with the picture. Here were masterful, detailed images of a rich pastoral world painted onto the walls of a dead desert. He wrote that they bore testimony to a state of life utterly different from anything you could see in the region now. He was looking at the portrait of a world that no longer existed, and for a long time, that is all anyone could say about it, that it was strange and beautiful and impossible. The question was, were the paintings fantasy or memory? Had these people painted a dream of a greener world, or had they simply painted what was outside, the way any of us would paint what we see? To answer that, you have to leave the art behind and go to the mud at the bottom of the sea. Off the coast of Northwest Africa, in the Atlantic Ocean, there is a spot on the seafloor known to science as Site 658C. And that unremarkable patch of mud contains one of the most important climate records on Earth. Here is why. When the land of North Africa is dry, the wind picks up its dust and carries it out over the Atlantic, where it settles slowly to the sea floor and gets buried in the sediment,
But
layer
the signs
by
on the
layer,
ground say
year
Earth
after year. So if you drill a core out of that sea floor, one of those long tubes of sediment we keep coming back to, and you measure how much wind-blown African dust is in each layer, you get a direct record of how dry or how wet North Africa was, going back tens of thousands of years. And that record is astonishing.
the sun is
It shows
setting.
that for the last
It's
several
beautiful.
thousand years, North
Look,
Africa has been
the
what it is
elephants
now,
come to drink.
bone dry, throwing
are so-
enormous quantities of dust out to sea. But go back further, into a window running roughly from 14,000 to 5,000 years ago, and the dust almost disappears. During that window, North Africa was not throwing dust into the Atlantic, because North Africa
storm
was not
approaches.
a desert. It
Look
was
at the
green.
mammoths graze.
Scientists call this window the African humid period. And the sediment cores, the fossil pollen, the ancient lake beds, and the bones of water-loving animals found deep in what is now desert all agree on the same picture. For thousands of years, the Sahara was a savanna. Grasslands stretched across what is now sand. There were wooded patches and wetlands and rivers. And there were lakes, including one, Lake Megachad, that at its peak was larger than any freshwater lake on Earth today. A genuine inland sea sitting in the middle of what is now some of the emptiest desert on the planet. And these lakes were not puddles. Lake Megachad, the ancestor of today's shrunken Lake Chad, covered an area larger than the modern Caspian Sea at its peak.
The sun is
A
beautiful
freshwater
tonight.
inland ocean
Yes,
sitting in the
it
heart
feels like a
of
good
what is now sand. Its old shorelines can still be traced from the air, vast ghost beaches ringing an emptiness where the water used to be. Fish bones, crocodile bones, hippo bones turn up in the dry
Look,
sand
the
hundreds of
giraffes are
kilometers from
drinking.
any water that exists today. The evidence is not subtle once you know to look for it. The desert is littered with the skeleton of a drowned world.
The hunt was
Hippos
fruitful
lived far to
today.
the north of
Yes,
anywhere
we
they
will
can
eat
survive
well
today.
tonight.
Giraffes moved across ground that is now bare rock. The swimmers in Al-Maji's cave were not a fantasy. They were a documentary. those people really did swim in real lakes that really were there. And the scale of that green world is hard to hold in your head. This was not a few oases dotted across the sand. It was a continuous living landscape the size of the United States, where the desert is today. To walk from one edge of the Sahara to the other, back then you would have passed through grassland and wetland and open water and wooded valleys, past herds of grazing animals and the smoke of human campfires for thousands of kilometers. And almost none of it would have looked like desert at all. The place we picture as the very definition of a wasteland was, for thousands of years, one of the great living regions of the planet.
Oh, I understand now.
So the paintings were true. The Sahara really was green. Which raises the two enormous questions at the heart of this
Look at all
story.
this life. This
Why
land
did
is
it turn
truly
green in
blessed.
the first place?
It's more beautiful.
And why, after thousands of years, did it die? The answer to
night
both
is
questions is
coming.
the same, and it is not on Earth at all. It is in the sky. Specifically, in the way the Earth moves around the sun. We tend to think of the Earth's orbit and its spin as fixed and eternal. They are not. Over long spans of time, the Earth wobbles. The most
The time
important
has
of
come
these
to follow
wobbles
the
for
path
our
of
story
our
is called
ancestors.
precession.
The
A
pasture
slow,
ahead looks
cyclical
green.
change in the direction
Yes,
the
it
Earth's
will be a
axis
good
points,
stop.
like the wobble of a spinning top that is running down. It takes roughly 20,000 years to go around once. Now, that wobble does not change how much total sunlight the Earth gets, but it changes the timing, which hemisphere is tilted toward the sun during which part of the year. And at certain points in the cycle, the northern hemisphere ends up tilted toward the sun during its summer more strongly than usual, receiving, at the peak, something like 4 to 8% more summer sunlight than it does today. That extra summer heat does something specific and powerful. It supercharges the monsoon. Every summer, the lands of North Africa heat up and hot air rises, and that rising air pulls in moist air from the ocean, the monsoon. When you crank up the summer sunlight, you crank up that heating, and you pull the rain-bearing monsoon much further north than it normally reaches. Rain that today falls only in Central Africa gets dragged up and over the Sahara. Do that for centuries, and the desert simply fills in. Rain feeds streams. Streams feed lakes. Water feeds grass. Grass feeds animals, and the grass itself changes the land, holding moisture, encouraging more rain, greening the desert further in a feedback loop that builds on itself. This is not a one-time event. It is a cycle. Scientists have found evidence of not one Green Sahara, but dozens of them, stretching back millions of years, each one paced by that same slow orbital wobble. The desert has bloomed and died over and over on a rhythm set by the geometry of the solar system. Sit with that for a second, because it changes how you see the desert entirely. The Sahara you picture, the endless dunes, the eternal emptiness, the very symbol of a dead and permanent wasteland, is not the Sahara's normal state. It is one phase of a cycle. The desert is a thing that breathes in and out over tens of thousands of years. Green, then dry, then green again, in a slow rhythm older than our species. We just happen to have been born, all of us, every human being alive today, during one of the dry breaths. We have never seen the Sahara green, but it has been dozens of times, and it will be again. The most recent bloom, the African humid period, began as the last ice age ended, some 14,500 years ago, and it turned the Sahara green for thousands of years. It was, in a very real sense, a paradise, and people moved into it. Here is something we have only learned very recently, and it is remarkable. In a rock shelter called Takakori in what is now southwestern Libya, today a place of endless dunes and barren stone, archaeologists found the remains of 15 people, women and children, buried over thousands of years. 7,000 years ago, the people buried there would not have looked out on desert. They would have looked out on a lake. Year-round water in the middle of what is now some of the most lifeless terrain on the planet. And these people were not just passing through. They lived there. The site holds pottery with the chemical traces of milk still in it, the oldest evidence of dairying anywhere in Africa. It holds signs of some of the earliest cereal use on the continent. Nearby, the rock walls are covered with the paintings of herders and their cattle. This was a settled, pastoral world. People who kept animals, made cheese and yogurt, gathered wild grain, buried their dead, and painted their lives on the rocks. In 2025, scientists managed to do something that had seemed almost impossible. They pulled ancient DNA out of 2 of those 7,000-year-old individuals, naturally mummified by the desert that came later, and read their genomes. And the result? Overturned an old assumption. For a long time, people had imagined the Green Sahara as a kind of highway, a green corridor down which populations flowed back and forth between the north of Africa and the lands south of the desert. But the DNA told a different story. These people belonged to a distinct North African lineage, one that had diverged from other human populations very early and then stayed isolated. Remarkably, deeply isolated for a very long time. The Green Sahara, it turned out, was not a corridor for people. Even in its lush, welcoming, thousands of years-long paradise, this population largely kept to itself. But here's the fascinating part. Their way of life did change. They took up herding cattle, sheep, and goats, a practice that came in from outside, from the direction of the eastern Mediterranean. And yet, the DNA shows almost no incoming genes to go with it, which means the herding didn't arrive with a wave of new people who replaced the old ones. It arrived as an idea. The knowledge of how to keep animals spread across the green land by contact, by exchange, neighbor to neighbor. The technology moved, but the people mostly stayed put. The Green Sahara was a corridor for ideas, even when it wasn't a corridor for people. So picture it now, fully. A vast green savanna where the worst desert on Earth is today. Lakes you could swim in, herds of cattle and wild giraffe, settled communities making cheese, painting their walls, burying their dead by the water, sharing new ideas across the grasslands. A whole world lived in for thousands of years. And then, the sky wobbled a little further and the rain began to fail. Remember the cause of the green. The northern summer sunlight, boosted by the orbital wobble, dragging the monsoon north. Now run the wobble forward. Slowly, over thousands of years, the Earth's orientation drifts on. The extra summer sunlight in the north fades. The monsoon's northward push weakens. The rain that had been dragged up over the Sahara begins, year by year, to fall short, to retreat back toward the south. And the desert comes back. Now, exactly how fast it came back is a real scientific argument, and it is worth being honest about, because it is more interesting than a simple answer. The famous version, the one that made headlines, comes from that Atlantic dust core, Site 658C. It showed a sharp jump in wind-blown dust around 5,500 years ago, which was read as a sudden collapse, the Green Sahara flipping to desert in the space of maybe 1 or 2 centuries. A tipping point, a world dying within a few human lifetimes. But other records complicate that. Drying shows up at different times in different places across North Africa. Some spread over many centuries, some longer. And a study published in 2024, working from a lake bed in Ethiopia, found that the terminal drying there unfolded over roughly 1,000 years, but that it came in violent pulses, severe droughts lasting anywhere from 20 to 80 years at a stretch. And that, I think, is the crucial insight, because it dissolves the argument. A climate can be gradual in the long view and brutally abrupt in lived experience at the same time. Zoom out to the scale of the whole planet over 1,000 years, and you see a slow, smooth decline. Zoom in to the scale of a single family standing by a shrinking lake, and you see catastrophe. A drought that lasts 50 years, that empties the lake your grandmother swam in, that kills the grass, that drives off the cattle, that does not break in your lifetime or your children's. Make it a single family again, because that is the only way to feel it. A family with a herd of cattle on a shore they have kept for generations. One year the rains are late. The next year they are later and thinner. The lake pulls back from the shore and the good grass with it, and the herd has to walk further each day to drink. A drought settles in that does not lift, not for a season, not for a decade. The old people say it has been dry before and always broken. It does not break. The cattle thin, and then they die, and the family walks, following the retreating water, following the last green, joining others doing the same until the only reliable water left anywhere is a single great river to the east, and everyone who is left is walking toward it. Either way, the outcome was the same. The lakes shrank and vanished. The grasslands browned and died. The rivers stopped running. The animals moved or died. And the people, the herders, the painters, the cheesemakers, the swimmers, had to leave or die with the land. And where did they go? Many of them, it is thought, went to the one place in the region where there was still reliable water. The valley of a great river fed from the wet highlands far to the south, a river that kept flowing even as the desert closed in around it. The Nile. There is a serious idea in archaeology that the drying of the Green Sahara helped push people together into the Nile Valley, concentrating populations along that thin green ribbon of survival, crowding them into one place, setting the stage over the following millennia for one of the first great civilizations on Earth. The paradise that died in the desert may have helped seed the kingdom that rose along the river. The end of one world, feeding the beginning of another. So here is what we know. Not so long ago, within the span of human history, while people were already farming and herding and painting, the largest desert on Earth was green. It had lakes and rivers and hippos and giraffes. It had cattle and cheese and art. It had people who lived full lives there for thousands of years and left us hundreds of thousands of pictures of a world that, if you did not have the pictures, you would never believe had existed. And then the earth wobbled, and the rain moved south, and the whole thing died. The lakes dried to dust. The rivers stopped. The paintings stayed on the rock, perfectly preserved by the very dryness that killed the world they showed. Which is the strange, cruel irony at the center of this story. The desert is the reason we still have the paintings. If the Sahara had stayed green, the art would have weathered away in the damp long ago. It survives because the world it depicts was destroyed. And here is the part that should sit with you. This was not caused by anything the people did. They did not overgraze it, or cut it down, or burn it. This was the sky. This was the slow, indifferent geometry of a planet turning on a wobbling axis, deciding, on a schedule set 20,000 years long, that it was time for the rain to move, and taking an entire living world with it when it did. The Green Sahara will come again. The wobble is still turning. Tens of thousands of years from now, on the orbital schedule, the monsoon will swing back north, and the desert will bloom again, and there will be lakes in the sand where there are dunes today. There will be a Green Sahara long after everything we have built is gone. It has happened dozens of times. It is, in the deep rhythm of the earth, the normal state of things. And the desert we think of as eternal is just the dry half of a very long breath. The swimmers knew a different Sahara. They swam in real water, under real trees, in a paradise that the sky gave them and the sky took away. And they left us the pictures on the walls of caves in the middle of nowhere so that we would know they were there.